Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Just thought I'd welcome you to another episode of these editing in Lightroom videos I'm doing. I hope you guys are finding value in these videos as you get to see a little bit of behind the scenes in a recent photography project. And yeah, here's the episode. Cheers.
So without further ado, I'm going to come in here to the first photo. I'm going to bring the overall exposure up a little bit, highlights down, whites down a little bit, and shadows up quite a bit. I should mention that the shoot was for this brand, Formatt. They make these really cool, sort of easy to build, easy to put together surfboard racks. And yeah, it's really cool to actually do a shoot for them because I've been following them for, like years and years on Instagram now. It was really cool. They actually reached out to me to do a photo shoot. So yeah, this is the other week. I shot these photos up at this beautiful house in the Central Coast on the northern end. But yeah, so coming in here to this photo, I'm gonna go ahead straight away because I don't like how this isn't like a perfect vertical line. With this kind of structural thing, product that holds something, or whether it be architecture, I really like straight vertical lines. And just make something look a lot more, a lot more structural. So I'm going to go in here to the profile corrections. I usually bring it down from what it automatically does, which is like around 100. I usually bring it down to somewhat halfway. And that just corrects some of the vignetting, some of the distortion. The distortion is not doing too much as usual. It's more the vignetting. You'll actually see it do something in. So if you look at the edges here, click it on or off, you'll see a big difference. So coming into the transform, just want to have a look at the vertical lines. And because this is a higher angle photo, the vertical lines will obviously be skewed a little bit. The only way to get vertical lines properly straight within the camera is to shoot it straight on, like parallel to whatever you're shooting. So if you come a little bit higher or lower angle, those lines will be off by a little bit automatically. So we're trying to come in and correct that while still having a relatively high angle photo. So we're gonna go ahead, and into the horizontal, or vertical, sorry. Drag out the vertical lines. Gonna have a look at what it looks like with a manual distortion. I think the middle needs to come out a little bit because this is kind of a wider angle photo. 30 mil, it's relatively wide. So wide angle photos tend to distort the middle of the frame, and depending on the focal length, you'll always get a slight distortion. Whether it's a long focal length that's compacting the middle, or a wide angle photo that's kind of stretching out the middle, if that makes sense. Every lens is different, and it's always something you have to play with. So coming into the crop here, I'm gonna do a nice 5:7 crop. Just make it a tiny bit tighter. And we're just gonna center sort of our boards and the subject here. So we don't want to crop out on the bottom here. So I'm going to actually leave it as shot. Go back into the distortion here. And bring it back just so we can see the foreground element of the product. We don't want to crop into the product, obviously. Give it a little bit of breathing room. So as shot, we had quite a bit, but because we do want to bring it in, how can we fix this situation? Because we don't want to actually crop out the bottom of the product, but we do want to change the vertical nature of the photo. So here's a little pro tip. We're going to go ahead and bring it into Photoshop. All right, so now that that's loaded into Photoshop, we have a little bit more of a play around with the vertical aspect of this photo. We want those nice vertical lines basically to meet up with the vertical line of the product. So it's only a tiny bit, like you can see the top corner here is meeting it and the bottom corner is just skipping out. And basically I'm just going to create a duplicate of this layer. I just dragged it down to this plus here. That creates a new layer of the original. I'm going to go into Command T, which is just the transform. And if you hold down the Command key while you have, Command T to get the transform. And then if you press and hold the Command key while dragging on any of these corners, you basically get a free transform where you can freely adjust perspective. So what I'm going to do is just drag out the bottom a tiny bit. See how that looks. Might take a second to adjust. Yeah, because it's meeting up with that vertical line now, it just looks a little bit more structural. We might do a little bit more, but we are doing good things here. So I'm just going to drag it out like that. The other side, just a tiny bit as well. And actually just going to drag the bottom in. So basically I just want to skew the bottom of the photo out in a way that whatever the middle of the photo is, we're getting nice straight lines. We seem to be doing that. If you look at our guides, just want basically, like the top corner meet up with the bottom corner. And we'll have a nice straight photo. Yeah, so that's doing really nice things. We're going to go ahead, Command S to save, and that'll basically drop it back into Lightroom. So once that's done, jump back into Lightroom. You can see we've got a sort of edited copy now. So that's the stretch one. And that's the original. So we're gonna go ahead and edit the stretch one a little bit. Gonna crop it down a tiny bit, in a tiny bit, and in a tiny bit. That's looking quite good. I don't like how there's a little green leaf here. So I'll go ahead and clone that out. It's done a good job. Awesome. And before I deliver the photos, I'll go ahead over all the photos with a more of a finer eye and look at removing a couple of things. That's kind of the last step in terms of what I want to do to a photo. I want to crop it, color grade it, then do any kind of retouching in that, removing visual distractions like little twigs or whatever elements that you don't want in a photo. That's kind of what I do last in terms of the steps. So I'm going to add a little bit of tone into this photo with the tone curve, a little bit more depth. As you probably noticed, if you've seen my last editing video or any editing videos in general, I like to have just a very slight S-curve. For me, it's quite pleasing. Just a slight clip on the highlights. And again, like keeping it very subtle, I think is key. I'm gonna bring the highlights down quite a bit, shadows up. And yeah, I quite like this photo as it is. I'm gonna come into the HSL slider and I'm gonna select saturation on the grass here, the yellow-green grass. I'm gonna desaturate it just a tiny little bit, probably not quite that much. Yeah, and in the hues, I'm gonna come into blue, and I want that blue to be slightly more green. As you can see, it's actually adjusting the color of the surfboard as well. That's okay because the surfboard is not the product in the shoot. So it's all right if we play around with the colors, but in general, I like to keep the colors of the product that I'm shooting as they are, as they should be, which is easy to do if it's black or white. It's not too much to screw up there, which is good. Keeps it simple. So I'm gonna just, on the temperature, just warm this up a tiny bit. So yeah, just a little bit. And I think I'm gonna come back into the crop. Again, with the crop, it's one of those things you could just play around for ages, but not spending too much more time on this photo. I think we'll move along. I think I'm gonna up the contrast a tiny bit, shadows a tiny bit more. I want a nice even exposure so you can sort of see, because it's a black product. So you want to be able to see that quite well. So for that, it has to be quite an like a bright photo to be able to see all the, the details in the actual black product. So I'm going to come in here later as a final step and sort of clean up all of these tiles because they are quite dirty. Yeah, I might even lighten them. But yeah, I think that's a final step that I'll come over and do. So I'm gonna go ahead and move to the next photo in the set. I think this is quite a nice frame. I really like the shadows that are happening over here. And the styling with the towel is kind of fun. And just the two layers of the boards, and you got the nice ocean in the background. So I'm gonna first off, come into the crop, 5x7. Have a look at that. Yeah, just take a little bit of height off it. I think I'm gonna crop up just a tiny bit. No, too far. Kind of want, yeah, I think those rule of thirds, wherever where those two lines are meeting, that's sort of, you want kind of one of your focal points, and I've got the logo nearly sitting on that, so I think it is quite nice the way it sort of draws your eye in with that respect. I'm gonna go ahead and bring up the shadows a tiny bit, bring up the blacks as well, crush the whites or bring down the whites. Overall exposure, just a tiny bit up. Dehaze, gonna have a look at what that's doing. Okay, I don't like that. I'm not gonna touch that. Clarity, okay, -5 on the clarity. Just give it a slightly more hazed sort of finish. I think you notice it more in the kind of the dark areas of the photo. My stomach's grumbling heaps. I need to eat, but I'm doing this intermittent fasting. So if you hear any stomach sounds, that's my hunger. I need to eat soon. But yeah, just coming to the vibrance and saturation. I always bring the saturation down a tiny bit, vibrance up a tiny bit. Don't know why, that's just how I do it. And again, into the tone curve. Get a little bit more depth into the photo. Yeah, just bring a nice S curve into it. I really like that the light's kind of coming from over here, so I do want to accentuate that. Just gonna go overall exposure. And you're gonna be able to see it most in the blue sky up here. I kind of want to accentuate that. So I'm gonna go shadows and then bring it up for that. And then if you go click on and off, yeah, it's subtle. And I'm always using this navigator window over here as a sort of thumbnail view of the large adjustments that I'm doing. Sometimes you can be too focused on the one area and be zoomed in, and it's good to sort of see it as a small picture, just to give you an overall feeling. And I think that's doing quite nice things. Very subtle, you wouldn't notice it on or off really if you just saw the finished photo, but it is doing very nice things, I think. So again, I just want to make sure that this vertical line is straight. And if you go into the crop menu, or the crop tool rather, and you are hovering over, you can hold down the command key and you get this kind of ruler. You can drag that, click and hold with the command key, and it'll straighten a line, whatever it is, to that line that you've drawn. So it'll straighten the photo to that line. So say if I want that to really, that's my horizon line, for instance, or the ocean's my horizon line, just line it up as best you can, and it'll actually straighten to that. I usually like that if I like, if there's a specific edge that I feel like the photo needs to be sort of aligned with, I'll use that tool in whatever way. See, it sort of, and it automatically will straighten to that line. I'm gonna crop in just a tiny bit. Actually, no. I like how much space is over here, and I like the shadow of the surfboards. So we can see a couple of thumbprints here. And that's the thing about shooting a shiny product. Everything sort of shows up. We're just gonna go to the heel setting. Wants to have a think about it. Really wants to have a think about it. Drag that over here. Don't want it copying another thumbprint. Really wants to have a think about it, doesn't it? So we're gonna go heel, heel, heel. And again, I'll come into this with more fine detail, I think, before I actually deliver the photos. But yeah, as you can see, as a start, that looks pretty good. So I do want it slightly warmer. Just bring up the overall color temperature just a little bit more. I'm gonna bring the highlights down a little bit more too. And then I'm actually gonna do that in the tone curve as well. So I do want slightly more of a, yeah, creamy whites for this. I think it just suits it. Yeah, I'm liking that quite a lot. I'm gonna come in here to the saturation. I'm gonna bring down the saturation on my greens a little bit. And overall, I'm gonna bring up the luminance of the green. So make it a little bit less saturated, but a little bit brighter overall. Coming here to the saturation. I think the blue is just a tiny bit too saturated here, I think. I want to make it slightly less obvious, so we're just going to make subtle changes. See, it's -8, -8 on the purple and blue settings. So just pressing the Y key before and after. I like the colors a lot more over here. That blue is just a little bit more subtle, and by having that more subtle, you're inadvertently bringing out the punchiness of the actual product. So coming into the next photo here, it's actually 3 photos technically, but I'm gonna do a HDR multiple exposure. So this is what's known as bracketing, when you take 3 different brackets or exposures to then be part of one image later on. So for instance, you bracket for highlights, midtones, and then shadows. You can do obviously gradations in between, like you could do 3 just for 1 for each, or you could do 5, you know, with 1 in between either way, sort of trying to balance it out to get as even as an exposure as you like. For instance, with this one, I've just done 3 because I thought that would just be simple enough when I was shooting, and it was very simple, just to 3 different exposures. Just using the shutter speed, not the aperture, because the aperture will change the depth of field and you won't be able to get, you won't be able to combine the exposures. So just using the shutter speed, and you can see it change over here. So obviously very bright, 1/60th a second, darker, 1/500th a second, and then fully pretty much exposing for those highlights out here, 1/1000th of a second. So that's gonna be the best way to do bracketing, is just changing your shutter speed. Obviously, not to the point where it's blurring, but if you're steady, you can go down pretty low and you'll still get a good result. So just command clicking. So click that one, shift, select them all, and just gonna come in here to photo merge HDR, high dynamic range. So you want the auto align on, otherwise you'll get kind of all sorts of funky ghosting, because I wasn't shooting this on a tripod. I was shooting them in the exact same position, but obviously your hand will move. And so you get slight overlays. So for instance, if we show deghost overlay, these are the things that have changed in terms of the actual position of where I was. It's pretty close, as you can tell, this is pretty good. But it's never perfect if you're not shooting with a tripod. So that's why we go deghost amount high, and that will automatically crop in the photo as well. Now, automatic settings. So this is what it looks like when it's combined all the photos, and Lightroom's gone in and sort of made some calls on what we want and done some settings. In this case, I think it's actually okay to start with this. We can always tweak it later on, the auto settings. So I'm gonna go ahead and click merge for those photos. It'll take a minute to actually create the HDR. So after Lightroom's had a big think about it, it's created this nice HDR from these 3 bracketed exposures, we've been able to get this, which is quite nice. But we need to add some character into it. So these are the automatic settings that Lightroom's applied, and it's pretty good just to get a nice, even exposure, but we need to add some character into it. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump into the tone curve, bring up my mid-tones, because that's kind of here. I do want that relatively bright. Shadows, I'm gonna bring down a tiny bit. We'll balance this out a little bit more later with the gradiated filter as well. Just wanna fade my blacks a tiny bit and clip those highlights. This is one of those ones where you could play around with it quite a lot. I'm gonna go ahead and add a gradiated filter. Just get a little bit more light over here. I want the highlights to be a little bit brighter, overall exposure brighter. And I'm gonna go ahead and play around with what the whites are doing. Yeah, I want the whites to be a little bit whiter as well. Go ahead and drag that over. And just click this button here to see before and after. And as you can see over here on the navigator, it's making a huge difference to the sort of overall appeal of the photo. I'm liking what it's doing, but I think we can come in here. So it's all about balance, having an even exposure, but obviously also trying to add tone, and have a little bit more depth to the shadows. It's something that creates tone in an image, but you also want to have detail. Yeah, I quite like how hazy because you don't want it like a real estate photo. You don't want it like 100% exposed, and real estate photos, the exposure outside's almost like that sometimes, while the inside's completely lit up. It just looks super fake to me. So we're gonna try and avoid that while still having an even exposure. I'm gonna go ahead and bring up the warmth or the temperature of the photo just a little bit. And as you can see, there's a big difference there. It's doing nice things. Gonna see what dehaze is doing. Yeah, see, that's too much. So, and clarity. Yeah, I kind of like the slightly more punchy on this one. So I'm gonna bring up the clarity just a tiny bit, +10, +11. And then blacks, I wanna bring up a tiny bit as well. Kind of like a bit of washing light from the top to sort of bring your attention away from the door frame here. Yeah, bring it sort of lighter towards the top of the frame and stretching that out so it's nice and gradiated. Might see what it looks like if I just adjust the shadows for this. Yeah, that might be a bit better. Shadows and a little bit of exposure. So if you can see before and after, quite a bit nicer. I'm gonna go ahead into the HSL, go to my greens here. I think my greens are a little bit too full on in terms of the saturation of what's happening out there. Gonna go ahead into the hue. It's like my blues. I want them a tiny bit more green. I just think it looks a bit more summery and fun when the ocean's a little bit more on that sort of aqua tint rather than sort of deep blue. Depends on the photo and it depends on the look you're going for. I'm gonna bring up my warmth a little bit more, just around I want to be specific with this, 5,200 Kelvin. There we go, let's be super specific. Yeah, I think we're looking pretty good though. I think overall we've done, this will be the biggest jump in terms of before and after, because we have had to do that bracketing to get the shot where it is, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Any more, and I think in terms of bringing out that highlights from the background here, it starts to look a little bit too fake, but yeah, we might play around with cleaning up the deck later. Any little visual distractions, I'll probably go ahead and clone in Photoshop, or just with the removal sort of tool here in Lightroom. Usually does a pretty good job. All right, so moving on to the next shot. This is quite a nice one with Kyal Kara here. I just like the moment. It's a great sort of composition, I think, of Kara sitting down here and looking up here to Kyal and vice versa, and just with the product in the middle. It's quite a nice punchy image. So I like the overall tones of what's happening here. We just need to accentuate more so that summer feel. So this one was more the harsh lighting with that summer feel. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy what I did on here and paste it onto this image. And work at it from there. Gonna up the vibrance just a tiny bit, the warmth a little bit more. Gonna say 5,230, just to be specific with the Kelvin. The vertical lines are looking pretty good. Might have to tweak it just a tiny bit to bring it out, but I think that's fine. We might just crop in a tiny bit on the stairs here. Crop in a little bit more here and then down. I think this is a bit of a visual distraction, so if you've got a nice clean line going into the image, I think that's better. And again, like these are not necessarily the crops I'll deliver to the client. I think they want quite a lot of space around the images in some of them, so I'm gonna leave that space for them, but in terms of they can put like text or logos or something, you know, in terms of in the empty space of the image, but I think it is kind of better without that visual distraction. So I kind of like how this shadow is meeting this corner. Creates quite a nice dynamic leading line when you've got sort of lines in and out and then you've got lines meeting the corners. It's always sort of a nice look. So I'm gonna come in here and just play around with the tones a little bit more. Just gonna accentuate them a little bit more, make it a bit more punchy. Yeah, that's looking really nice and summery. Bring up my shadows a tiny bit. And yeah, I really like what the tones that are happening here. Really bright and fun. Might actually end up even removing these might actually end up even removing these windows up here because I do find them a little bit distracting. So I think that'll be the last thing that I do in Photoshop, but I'll just show you here for the video as a quick sort of a quick guide. So here again in Photoshop, again, same as last time, creating a new layer, coming up here to that window. Now I'll just see what the patch tool does. Patch tool can do pretty amazing things these days. So you just go ahead and roughly outline what you want to basically patch, because we're going to treat that as like a patch in the wall that we're healing. We're going to drag the section that we kind of want to patch it with, and it'll go ahead and match up the tone to where, oh my gosh, that looks pretty good. So before, after. And same with the window down here. Just do a rough, obviously a little bit harder because it's right on the stair there, but I think it should do a pretty good job. Go ahead and drag it up to a nice section. See, we've just left a little bit of ghosting there, which is no problem. We'll just fix that easily with the stamp tool, or the clone stamp tool rather. So I'm just gonna have, that's holding the Option key allows you to target where you wanna clone from, and just go over the top. Now we zoom out, beautiful. We've removed those sort of distracting windows, and it's a much cleaner photo. So again, save, that'll drop it back into Lightroom. And it's created a version in Lightroom. Beautiful. All right, moving on to the next photo. I just want to end it with this really simple little minimal shot here, which I was super happy with. I love the sort of simple graphical nature of it. I want to leave them enough room up here to chuck a logo on. Just have the product nice and sort of centered, the logo sort of centered in the crop here. Just about the colors of the boards too, really. So because it is that same bright and sunny sort of looking shot, the same scene as this, but just from a different angle, I'm gonna copy, paste, just see what that looks like. Yeah, so that's just for a nice sort of even summery feel to the photo here. Gonna come into a tone curve again. Bring down, oh, some funky things. Yeah, bring down our shadows a little bit. And the blacks, I want the blacks relatively bright. I'm gonna bring them up a little bit. But I think the tone curve is doing nice things. Just want to accentuate as well that light coming from over here and add a little bit of a gradiated filter. Yeah, hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. Another sort of basic editing video from a recent shoot. And yeah, hopefully you guys are getting value out of these random videos. But I'll just go through here and have a quick look of kind of what we've been able to do. This first shot, kind of like the height on this shot. I might end up playing around a little bit and adding another gradient filter, but these are all things that you can do if you have the time. Really happy with this shot. Love the overall summery vibe. That's kind of just a nice one, showing the location as well. I think it shows it off quite nicely, that room. This is a really fun one. Probably one of my favorites, just in terms of the people in photos is always nice. And so, yeah, and this one's nice and minimal, very graphical. They could add their logo, or, you know, it's got a nice warm summery glow while being pretty minimalist. Obviously, it's just a line of the stairs in the background. But yeah, all right, that's all she wrote for this editing video. I hope you guys enjoyed once again. Maybe drop a like or a subscribe to the channel if you liked it, and I'll catch you later. Have a good one.